Free Will and Conscience. The Third Testament. Revelations of Jesus Christ. Chapter 34. The importance of the conscience and free will. Thus saith the Lord. Listen, O disciples. Man has as his spiritual gifts freedom of will and a conscience. Everyone at birth has been endowed with virtues and can make use of them. In his spirit is the light of his conscience, but at the same time that the flesh develops, with it passions unfold, the bad inclinations, these being the ones that battle against those virtues. God permits this because where there is no struggle, there are no merits, and this is what you need in order to ascend along the spiritual path. What would be the merit of the children of God if they did not struggle? What would you do if you lived filled with happiness, as is your wish in this world? Would you expect spiritual progress if you were surrounded by comforts and riches? You would be at a standstill, for merit does not exist where there is no struggle. But do not be confused, for when I speak of conflict, I refer to that which you develop in order to master your weaknesses and passions. Those battles are the only ones which I allow in men, so that they will dominate their egotism and their materialism, in order for the spirit to take its rightful place, illuminated by its conscience. That inner battle I do authorize, but not the one which men use with the desire of exalting themselves, blinded by ambition and wickedness. The spirit fights to achieve its elevation and progress, while the material form gives in at every step to the attractions of the world. Yet the spirit and the material can be harmonized, giving to each what legitimately pertains to it. That is what my doctrine teaches. How can you practice my law in every case? By listening to the voice of the conscience, which is the judge of your acts. I do not come to command that which you cannot perform. I come to persuade you that the road to happiness is not a fantasy, that it exists, and the way to travel it is what I am showing you. You are free to choose the road, but it is my duty as Father to show you the true and the shortest road, that which has always been illuminated by the light of the divine beacon that is my love for you. For you are the disciples who thirst always to hear the new words that come to affirm your knowledge and revive your faith. I have placed the conscience in your being so it can be in the midst of all your steps, since the conscience is able to distinguish good from bad and what is just from what is not. With that light, you cannot be deceived nor be called ignorant. How could the spiritual follower deceive his brother or try to deceive even himself if he knows the truth? Man on earth is a prince to whom my love and my justice gave that title, and the order that he received from the very beginning was to have dominion over the earth. Over the divine gift of your free will, I put a beacon to illuminate the path of your life, the conscience. The freedom to act and the light of the conscience to distinguish good from evil are the two greatest gifts of love that the Father has bequeathed to your spirit. They are in men before birth and after death. The conscience guides men and does not leave their side in moments of desperation, nor in moments of lost reason, nor even in agony, for it is intimately united to the Spirit. The Spirit possesses the gift of free will, through which it must earn merit in order to save itself. Who guides, orients, or counsels the spirit during its free wandering, so that it can distinguish right from wrong, and thereby not be lost? The conscience. The conscience is the divine spark, a higher light, and is a force to help men not to sin. What merit would there be in men if the conscience had the material strength to force them to remain on the side of good? I want you to know that merit consists of listening to that voice, and persuading yourselves that that voice never lies, nor is mistaken in its counsel, and in faithfully obeying its dictates. As you can understand, to hear that voice clearly requires preparation and concentration within oneself. Who practices such obedience in the present times? Ask yourselves. The conscience has always manifested itself in man, but man has not achieved the necessary evolution to guide all his life by that divine voice. Man has needed laws, teachings, precepts, religions, and advice for guidance. When men come to enter into communion with their spirits, and instead of looking for it outwardly, seek it within themselves, they can hear that gentle, persuasive, wise, and just voice that has always been vibrating within them without being heard. And they come to understand that the conscience is the presence of God, and that it is the true means by which men should communicate with their Father and Creator. All bear my light. Every spirit possesses that grace. Yet, while in some that light has grown and increased to show itself outwardly, in others it has been latent, hidden and ignored. Nonetheless, I tell you truly, no matter how backwards a man may be spiritually, he can always distinguish between good and evil, and so you are all responsible before me for your acts. I must tell you that responsibility grows in you according to the development of your understanding, for you are increasingly more sensitive to the dictates of the conscience. I want you to know that among all the creatures of this world, you are the favored being, gifted with a spirit and a conscience. I have given you freedom of will, so that you may take by your own choice the straight road that leads to me. It is not a flowery path that I offer you, but that of prayer, penance, and struggle, and along that road your conscience will guide you. What would become of the spirit deprived of its freedom of will? In the first place, it would not be a spirit, and therefore it would not be a creation worthy of supreme being. It would be something like those machines that you create, something without life of its own, without intelligence, without will, without aspirations. I gave free will to man, but if in his confusion he complains about it, I will tell him that I also gave him the ability to choose and comprehend. At the same time, I revealed my law to him, which is the way not to stumble or become lost, and kindled the light of his conscience, which is an inner beacon that illuminates the way of the spirit and leads it to eternal life. Why does sin exist and evil dominate? And why do wars break out? Because man does not listen to the dictates of his conscience and badly uses his free will. The world is not listening, because the voices of these material forms, by which I communicate, have little reach. It is then the voice of the conscience, which is my wisdom, that speaks to humanity, surprising many who, enveloped in their selfishness, are deaf to the call of that voice, and attentive only to adulation and earthly adoration, enjoying their greatness and power. The abuse of free will. Today I find myself with a humanity that is weakened in spiritual matters because of the abuse that has been made of the gift of free will. I trace the path of justice, love, charity, and goodness. Humanity has created another, of apparent light, which has led them to the abyss. Upon turning back, my word shows you the same road that you have previously not wished to take, and he would be unjust and senseless who says that this doctrine confuses or delays. Behold, mankind occupied in destroying and hating one another, in snatching the power from each other, without holding back on crime, theft, or treachery. There you have men who succumb by the millions, victims of their fellow men, and others who perish from the effect of vice. Is there light in all that? Does the spirit within them speak out? What exists there is darkness and pain, resulting from the abuse of the gift of the freedom of will, and from not listening to the inner voice, of not beholding the light of that spark of God that everyone carries within his being, and which is the divine light that you call conscience. Free will is the highest expression, the most complete gift of the liberty that was conceded to man on the road of life, so that by perseverance in good, achieved by the counsel of the conscience, and the struggle to overcome its trials, you reach the bosom of the Father. But free will has been replaced by libertinism. The conscience is unheard, only the dictates of the world are obeyed, and spirituality has been supplanted by materialism. Faced with such confusion and so much strain, my doctrine will appear absurd to the men of this time. Yet, I tell you, it is exactly the teaching that is needed, so that men free themselves from the lethargy in which they find themselves. My word is the road. It is the divine law that guides you to perfection, the light that elevates the spirit, but which has been dulled when the flesh, by its rigidity, has imposed itself, not hearing the interior voice of its conscience. Woe then to the spirit that has ceded to the impulses of the material and has let itself be dominated by the influence of the world that surrounds it, exchanging its post as guide for that of a defenseless being, carried from one side to the other by human passions and weaknesses, like dry leaves carried aimlessly by the wind. The man who most loves his freedom fears to submit himself to the divine will because he is fearful that the spirit will tame him, depriving him of many human satisfactions that he knows will harm him and cause him to abandon the road that leads to true life. The time in which men have taken their free will to use it in pleasures, low passions, hatred, and vengeance is coming to an end. My justice is closing the paths of sin and opening instead the path to reconciliation and regeneration, so that they can find the road to peace that they have looked for in vain by other means. I gave you the gift of free will, and I have respected that blessed liberty conceded to my children. But I also placed in your being the divine light of the conscience, so that guided by it, you channel your gifts. And I tell you, that in the struggle between the spirit and the flesh, the spirit has suffered a defeat, a painful fall that little by little has been distancing it from the source of truth, which I am. Its defeat is not final, but transitory, for from the depths of the abyss, the spirit shall rise when it can no longer tolerate its hunger, thirst, nakedness, and lack of light. Pain shall be its salvation, and hearing the voice of its conscience, it shall rise strong and enlightened, fervent and inspired, to take up once again its gifts, but no longer with the liberty to apply them to good or evil, but consecrating them strictly to the fulfillment of the divine laws, which is the best worship you can offer my spirit. The overriding need to obey the impulses of the conscience. How far from reality in this instant are those millions of beings who live only for their material present? How can they open their eyes to reality? Only by listening to the voice of their conscience. The voice that, to be heard, requires concentration, meditation, and prayer. Always when you wish to know if the path that you follow is that of your evolution, you may consult your conscience, and if there is peace in it, and if charity and goodwill toward your brethren lodges in your heart, you can be certain that your light still shines, and your word comforts and heals. However, if you discover that within your heart there has germinated greed, bad will, materiality, and lust, you can be certain that your light has turned into darkness and imposture. Do you wish to offer the Father a soiled harvest instead of a golden grain when He calls on you? Disciples, if you do not wish to suffer from errors or mistakes, examine your actions in the light of your conscience, and if there is something that tarnishes them, examine yourself deeply, and you shall find the stains, and thereby be able to cleanse them. within you there is a mirror into which you can look and see if you are or are not clean. The spiritualist should be recognized by his deeds, and so that those deeds may be clean, they must have been dictated by the conscience. Who acts thusly will feel worthy of calling himself my disciple. Who may deceive me? No one. I do not come to judge you for what you do, but for the intentions with which you act. I am in your conscience and beyond it. How could you imagine that I might be ignorant of your acts and the motives for them? The struggle between free will and conscience. When the first human beings inhabited the earth, the Creator placed His love in them, equipped them with a spirit, and ignited His light in their conscience, at the same time that they were given free will. And while some struggled to persevere in righteousness, combating all temptations to remain clean and worthy of the Lord, and in agreement with their consciences, others, from sin to sin and fault to fault, went along forgetting fetters, link by link through their sins, guided only by the voice of the senses, dominated by their passions, and sowing error and temptation among their brothers. Yet, by the side of these troubled spirits, my prophets have also come as angelic messengers of my divinity to awaken humanity, warn them of menaces, and announce my coming. The flesh was stubborn and reluctant in following the voice of that interior light that you call conscience, and it was easier for it to follow those impulses that led toward the libertinism of its instincts and passions. Humanity has traveled much of the path of the life on this earth in open battle between the conscience, which has never quieted, and the flesh, which wishes to make of materialism its worship and law, without either the material or the spiritual having triumphed, for the struggle continues. Do you ask me which will triumph? I tell you that it shall not be long until the absolute triumph of the conscience, working through the spirit in the flesh. Can you not foresee that after so much struggle and such combat, that the material, which is human and fleeting, will have to bend before the conscience, which is my eternal light? Understand, after this prolonged combat, man will finally reach the sensitivity and docility that he has never previously shown to that voice, and to the spiritual life that vibrates and palpitates within his being. All of you march toward that point without knowing it. Yet when you see the triumph of right and justice on earth, you will understand the reason for the struggle, the combats, and the trials. Do you not see that man is before and above all that surrounds him, that he is the only being given free will and the conscience? From free will have flowed all the errors, faults, and sins of humanity, but they are fleeting errors in the presence of the justice and eternity of the Creator. For in time, the conscience shall triumph over the weaknesses of the material form and the spirit, and with that triumph will come the victory of the light, which is the victory of wisdom over the darkness that is ignorance. It shall be the triumph of good, which is love, justice, and harmony, over evil, which is selfishness, libertinism, and injustice. Nothing is impossible for me. My will has been done, and always will be done, even though there are times when it seems that it is the will of men, not mine, that dominates. On the path of man's free will, its reign over the earth, the triumphs of its arrogance, the domination that with its strength it sometimes imposes, are so fleeting compared to eternity that it could absolutely never force a change in the divine plans. And so tomorrow, or in the course of their accomplishment, the will of my spirit over all beings is made manifest, saving the good and erasing the impure. The time shall come when the borders of this world are erased by love, and the worlds approach each other through spirituality. Until then, the struggle will continue between the conscience and the free will, which man takes advantage of to do as he wishes in life. The struggle between these two forces will come to its peak, and the triumph will fall to the Spirit, which, in a surrender of absolute love for the Father, will say to him, "Lord, I renounce my free will, work only your will in me." I shall bless him who comes before me in this way, and wrap him in my light. What is more, I shall make him know that the blessed liberty that was given him will never be withdrawn. For he who does the will of his Father, who is faithful and obedient, is worthy of his Lord's trust. The conscience through the new word of God. My doctrine, full of light and love, comes to strengthen the spirit, so that it may impose its power on the flesh and sensitize it, so that the inspirations of the conscience are ever more perceptible to it. Spirituality is the purpose that humanity must pursue, since through it, it will come to identify itself plainly with the conscience, and come finally to distinguish right from wrong. Because of the lack of spiritual elevation of men, that wise and profound, righteous and just interior voice has not been heard and interpreted as it should have been, and therefore man has not yet reached the absolute understanding that permits him to distinguish truly between right and wrong. That is not all, for he also needs to find himself the strength necessary to follow every good impulse and obey every enlightened inspiration, rejecting at the same time any impure or evil temptation, thought, or feeling. How easy it will be for men to understand one another when they meditate and listen to the dictates of their higher reason. The voice of the judge they do not wish to hear, because they know it will order them to do the opposite of all they do now. I say to you that if you have been unwilling to listen to the voice of your conscience, then you have been disobedient and lacked humility to practice my doctrine. You recognize my doctrine in theory, but you do not truly practice it. Although you acknowledge that it possesses divine essence, and that Christ was truly great and his teachings perfect, no one wants to truly imitate the divine master in order to achieve his greatness. No one wants to reach him, imitating him truly. You need to realize that I did not come in the second era only to make you aware of my spiritual greatness, but also in order for you to become spiritually great. I will reunite all men and all peoples around my new message. I shall call them as a shepherd does his sheep, and prepare for them the peace of a shelter, where they can take refuge from the inclemencies and the storms. You shall see that although many appear to have not the smallest trace of faith or spirituality, they conserve in the purest part of their spirits the immortal principles of spiritual life. And you shall see how many who seem to have no religion at all bear in the most intimate region of their being an indestructible altar. Before that interior altar, men shall have to prostrate themselves spiritually and sincerely repentant of their disobedience, cry for their faults, their evil deeds, and their offenses. There, before the altar of the conscience, human arrogance shall fall, and men will cease to consider themselves as superior for reasons of their race. Then shall come the renunciations, the restitutions, and finally peace, as the legitimate fruit of love, humility, faith, and goodwill.